All righty, welcome. I am Heather Pierce Campbell, the legal website warrior. I'm an attorney and legal coach based here in Seattle, Washington, serving entrepreneurs around the US and the world. Welcome to another episode of Guts, Grit, and Great Business. I am super excited to bring you Holly Chantal today. Welcome, Holly.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to connect with you. We were laughing about our computers misbehaving and we had to do a little technology reset.
You're being so naughty.
So they were just feeling super naughty for a Tuesday, but we're back and I'm super excited to connect with you. I know we've got lots of great topics and stories to talk about today. For those of you that don't know Holly, for over a decade, Holly Chantal has been helping visionary coaches and service professionals uncover the brand that is at the core of their work and build the necessary infrastructure to support rapid growth in their business. Her clients have gone on to create sold-out launches, sell 100K offers, and elevate themselves as leaders in their industry using the messaging and marketing she developed for them. If you're looking for someone that can quickly grasp what you do in all of its complexity and help you find the best path forward, Holly is the woman to call. So welcome, Holly. I know you and I were initially introduced through my friend, Jay Rook, who's also been on the podcast.
Yes, Jay is awesome.
Jay is awesome. And then we reconnected recently because we landed in the same mastermind.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's fabulous to have you here. Share with our listeners a little bit about how you got started in the messaging world.
Yeah, so I kind of probably like a lot of your guests fell into it organically, kind of by accident. I started out doing website design. And specifically for coaches and consultants. And what happened was I found that even though a lot of the folks I was working with were 6 and 7 figures, when it came down to their website, they didn't know what to say. They didn't know what strategies to use. So they couldn't ask for anything specifically. It was kind of a I'll know it when I see it kind of thing. And any listeners that are in like the creative space know what a nightmare that is. And because you're having to give revision after revision until they see it. So I started to develop some processes for getting some of those preliminary decisions out of the way before we started a project. And really foundationally, that came down to target audience, offers, what are the marketing strategies are they using? And then I would design the strategy around their natural communication style and their audience and all of those things. And I ended up writing their copy. And so I would in order to get the project done, I would just do it all. And it ended up working out really well because when my business partner retired from design and that was no longer something I could offer, I still had that messaging strategy and branding to fall back on. And that's what I do. And that's really where my passion has always been. Once I got into it and realized how fun it can be to really dig into the nitty gritty of how people work and what their magic is. And then how do we put words to it? I find that that's really, really fun. And it's been great.
Oh, I love that. Well, I can see you light up even just talking about it. It's so interesting that it started essentially out of necessity for you, right? In order to like do this other thing that you were creating, I mean, a website. It is amazing how much thought and careful attention to detail and everything else that is required to go into, building a website. I think people tend to just think like, I love that. I know it when I'll see it, I'll know it when I see it. And it's so much more than that. It's really is like piecing together this puzzle for anybody that's ever gone through a website launch or website redesign. It's quite a process.
It's really involved. And I feel like a lot of folks put it on their to-do list and they don't realize that it's a project. Like you have to give yourself a significant amount of time to just make sure that, because once it's done, your website should last you a few years. So if you rush it, or if you really don't do this foundational work first, you could be wasting a lot of money having to redo it again because it's just not right.
Right. And redoing it.
Emails ready to go for
My
you. Ready for you.
phone. Welcome to technology misbehaving. So I use Voxer in my business, and every once in a while,
It just
certain
talks to you in the middle of a conversation. That's
right,
hilarious.
even when it's not open, it just starts
That
talking.
prompts
So
me to put my phone on do not disturb.
mine is. This is the irony is mine is, and it is somehow, let me actually, I'm gonna do the serious hardcore do not disturb. Let's
Yeah,
send
I
you.
have the like do not disturb that, my favorites can still call me. And then there's like the do not disturb, like, I'm sorry if you're dying, you're gonna have to wait about a half an hour for me to get off the phone.
Right. The house is burning down. We'll have to check in on you later. I know. Oh, technology. Okay, so where were we? Oh, talking about websites, the complexity, and how you were saying if you don't put enough thought into it, right, you can end up with something that is not truly reflective of who you are. And I feel like you'd have to redo it in a few years anyways, right?
Right.
I think the goal is that we all have websites that reflect who we truly are, who reflect our services, are really a good representation of ourselves. And if we miss the mark, it shows up in our business,
Right. And the
right?
thing is that you evolve over time. So 2, 3 years from now, your website is not going to reflect you anymore because most entrepreneurs I know get bored very quickly with the same old, same old. So you're a fast evolving person, and your website needs to reflect that.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people get caught up on the design and images, and, the messaging is really the most important part, right? But it's
That's why I love messaging because it's so easy to update.
yeah.
So as long as your website structure is a fit for the type of marketing that you're doing,
Mm.
the messaging is so easy to change because it's just words.
Mm.
And so it's
You
very
mean from
easy
a
to,
functional perspective,
yes,
technical
yes,
perspective?
from a technical perspective, you can review the way you're saying things, test your headlines. There's just so much more flexibility, and it's a dynamic part of your business. So that's kind of where I nerd out is continually updating that and upgrading so you're getting better results.
Mm. Well, and that was actually going to be my next question, because I could imagine some people listening are like, what? I have to redo my website every few years. But I think what I'm hearing you say is it's not like an entire website redo. It's really about just keeping the content fresh, keeping the message on point.
Yes. If
Yes.
your website visually represents you, then that stays the same. It's really the content and the messaging that needs to upgrade because you're evolving and changing who you're serving, the type of offers you have. And those are the kinds of things that need to stay in alignment.
Yeah. So when you develop this process that you referenced early on about helping people figure out their message, tell us a little bit about how that came about. And do you have a process that you walk people through to help them really boil down to kind of the true essence of what it is that they need to be saying?
Yeah, so that started out as the branding game, which was based on Candyland, and we would take people through this whole journey of figuring out their personality and who their target audience was, and they'd explore the forest of opportunity to figure out what their niche was and those kinds of things. I actually still have that program. I launched it back in 2012, and it's gone through a few evolutions over the years, but
Oh
it's
my
it's
God.
still
All,
alive and
all
awesome.
the, yeah, all the 70s and 80s kids are freaking out over the fact that you just said Candyland.
Yep, exactly. And so yeah, there is a defined process, and what it really comes down to is those very foundational pieces of not just understanding your target audience demographically. So a lot of folks, they'll create a whole description of their avatar, and it's, are they married? Do they have kids? What kind of industry are they in? What is their pay scale? And are they motivated and all those things? But what they're missing are the psychographics of what does their day-to-day look like in relation to your problem, and what symptoms are they experiencing that they don't realize are symptoms. And we find those things because those are the real hooks to use in your marketing, is when someone can see themselves in the content you're creating, they they lean in and they realize that you really get them. So that's step one. And then step two is being able to describe how you work. So basically the method that you're using with your clients and why it works. So why do you do things the way you do? And this is really important because I find that most, especially coaches and consultants, when you look at the offers on their website, it's all about what's included.
Mhm.
It's not what the modality is, what the logic is behind the modality, what their philosophy and their point of view is about why they do things this way. And so what happens is this is why prospects will compare prices, because
Apples,
if
yeah.
yeah, it's like apples to apples. Well, this person's going to give me this number of calls, that person's going to give me that number of calls, and they say they're going to tick all these boxes. But if you don't have that underlying method and philosophy behind why your offer is going to work, it, it they are comparing apples to apples when they could be comparing apples to oranges, and price is completely irrelevant.
Yep.
And that's what we really need to dial into when you're selling offers that are like 5,000 and up,
Mm.
is you really have to dial in that method. I'd say, like, when your offer is more like commodity, like when you're starting out and you're really kind of figuring out what that is and you're just selling coaching, it's a little bit simpler. But the more you dial in that and refine your message, the higher the prices are that you can charge, and the more ideal clients you're going to get, because they just really resonate on a whole other level.
Mm. What percentage, and I don't know how many clients you've worked with over the years, but what percentage would you say have their messaging on point, like are pretty close to nailing the mark and just need a little tweaking, versus people who really need to start from the ground up and really have outside help getting their messaging right?
So that's a really interesting question. I'm not sure what the percentage would be, because there's a couple different stages that I work with. One is the beginning stages, which
Mm.
they feel so foggy on what they're offering that it's very clear, like you need to be walked through it, just because it's part of the exploration process of figuring out your business.
Yep.
And so I call that there's actually 3 stages of brand. So that's the experimental stage, where you haven't really quite figured out what your major is yet. You're experimenting a little bit. And so that's a really kind of frustrating hamster wheel to be on, because you'll go through a lot of different exercises, a lot of different programs in regards to who your target audience is and what you're offering. And every time you feel like you have it, you say it to someone, give someone like, this is what I do, and they don't get it, and you feel like you have to start over again. Or you'll start marketing, but you're not getting clients, so you
Mm.
stop and start over again. So that's a really frustrating place to be. And those folks, they're usually much closer than they think. It's just the confidence piece and having the validation that they're on the right track that they're missing. So they're
Mm.
not taking it far enough to actually be able to create a tangible result. So I'd say that percentage is pretty high. And I find that stage lasts about 18 months
Yeah.
if if you don't get help. So if you're taking programs and you're kind of doing things on your own, and you find yourself revisiting those things over and over again, it takes about 18 months before you realize. I think it's because when you start your business, you give yourself that first year to kind of figure things out. And then once you're like halfway through the second year and you're spending more than you're making, you start questioning, okay, like I got to get this done or this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
Um, so the other folks that I work with are those that are really far along in the business. They're usually already at 6 figures. And what they want is more consistent leads. They want to raise their prices. They want to be attracting, a more ideal client rather than just taking whoever's coming to them. And for those folks, it's so funny because their marketing will be very general, again, like what's included and that kind of thing. But when you talk to them, the level of knowledge and insight and expertise that they have is just so tremendous that my job is super easy, because I can just ask them the right questions and pull out exactly what they need for their marketing. So for them, I say like they're like 80% of the way there, but it's that 20% that makes the difference, because
Mm.
obviously they have things that are working. But if we bring in that 20%, it just takes things to a whole other level very, very quickly.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, the piece that you mentioned about confidence early on, and also the fact that, entrepreneurs bump up very quickly against the reality that they don't have a lot of time or money to waste. Right. And that churn of like testing out your messaging, testing out your offer, getting feedback from the marketplace. I would imagine that's particularly true where somebody has, created launched their business or getting into the consulting or coaching space and doesn't yet come from a background where they maybe already feel like the expert, right? Mm-hmm. Versus somebody who's had a whole career or been inside of the corporate world or somehow comes with the experience of knowing exactly who they're there for. I think that message can get dialed in a lot more quickly, right? But it does all come down to experience and confidence.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So with your folks that are more advanced that you say are 80% of the way there, what are you generally focusing on for those people? Because I'd imagine that could be a lot of my listeners, right? They've been around a bit. They're in the expert space, coaching, consulting, expert positioning, regardless of what they're doing. What do those listeners need to be watching for when it comes to their messaging, their marketing efforts? How do you help them tweak something that's decent to make it really great?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. This is where I completely nerd out. It's so much fun. So there's a lot of different directions we can go here, but I'm going to start with, it's all about dialing in the nuances. So what I find when someone is established, their experience and things are working, is they fall into certain language patterns that they've because they've been running their business so long, they describe things in a certain way and it becomes habitual and they don't even realize it. And so what happens for them is when they decide they want to raise their price, or when they decide, okay, I want to go from one-on-one to groups, or I want to go from groups that are this size to this size, like they decide they want to give their offer a different structure or a different audience, that's where they run into problems because they've been programmed to do a certain thing for so long that changing your price is not just changing the text on your website and in your shopping cart. There's a whole other level of audience that you need to be attracting, and they respond to different examples in your marketing. And when you're filling groups, there's different marketing strategies to be using. There's different ways that your group needs to appeal to the folks that are coming in. So at that point, it's really dialing in the nuances and understanding not just like big picture target audience who we want to attract, but like specifically cherry picking the people that we want in your programs. And what do we need to do to cherry pick them out of that larger audience and position your service just for them? And that seems really limiting, like when I say like we're just speaking to one person, but what the reality is, we create multiple avatars and we just speak to them one at a time. So we can still work with multiple audiences, multiple people, but if we're really being strategic, then we're just talking to one at a time and then bringing them into the offer that can fit a variety of people. The other thing is, when you've been doing something for so long, it can be very difficult for you, because you're so close to it, to really understand what the magic is with your work, because it's so innate to you. It's just second nature and you don't realize the magic that you have. And so I've worked with a few folks that what they're spotlighting in their offer, because it made so much sense for them, because that's why they created it, etc., is actually not what appeals to their audience. And it's so frustrating because they're like, this is the most amazing thing ever. Like it helped me so much. And I can see it helping the people I'm talking to, but for some reason, they're not seeing it. They're not signing up, at least in the volume that they expect. And what usually happens is when we really go through the magic behind their method and how the program is put together and all those things, we find other things to spotlight. If we brought so if you think of a stage production, you have the lead character and then you have the supporting actors. Your offer is the same way. Like you have the lead thing, nuances to spotlight the lead features or the lead results, etc. and then everything else takes a back seat. If you're spotlighting the wrong thing, sometimes that's why you're not getting the result that you expect.
And is it that people just can't see their own, for lack of a better term, like their own special sauce? What makes their particular offer really, or their services really great for their clients? How do you close that gap for them?
Just having an objective view is often really eye-opening. So often in our first conversation before we even started working together, just the questions that I'm asking, they start looking at their offer in a different way. I was talking to someone yesterday, we were talking about their target audience, and I just asked them a few questions, and they started taking their audience and immediately came up with 3 different avatars. And they were like, I've never looked at it this way before. And it was just because they hadn't been asked the question. And this was before we had started working together. So like, just imagine how much further she's going to take that. But it's just it's just being able to take a different perspective, get out of that day to day. And because we are so close to our work and we have so much knowledge behind and so much expertise and experience that when we're saying things, they land differently for us than they would for someone that doesn't come from with all that context behind it.
Oh, I've walked through exactly what you're talking about. Like I worked on my own website redesign and relaunch last year, and I got some coaching from somebody who is in the copywriting messaging space. And he was very generous. I paid him to help me with my about page, right? And he's like, I just want you to write me your story. He gave me some parameters, but then we sat down together, and what you're talking about, just getting the outside perspective, like he would look at whole sections and be like, you don't need that. Like you can literally just take that whole section out. And it made me laugh inside because I'm like, wow, that's like totally irrelevant. And yet once I reviewed it from his perspective, made so much more sense, right? And I think it is just reflective of the fact that we're all so close to our own stories, our own work, our own, everything. It can be really hard to change that perspective without really getting the assistance that we need. And the other point that you raise about people, being in their industry or their career or their work for so long, using certain lingo, is that about like industry speak or something else?
It's not just industry speak. It's, let's say you're describing your target audience in a certain way, and you're writing content that is relevant to them, like teaching them strategies and helping them recognize the problems that they're having in their life and that kind of thing. You get so ingrained into who you're talking to that when you shift who you're talking to, it's hard not to speak to when you're talking to person 2, it's hard to not also speak to person 1. So an example I give of just like the nuances in language is that overwhelm can mean a lot of different things. And a lot of coaches and consultants use overwhelm, but without context around it. So they'll say, are you overwhelmed with your marketing? If someone is overwhelmed with their marketing, it means they don't know what to do. But if you say, are you overwhelmed with all of the things you're having to do to market your business? It means they're overwhelmed by the sheer amount of effort they're having to put in. So it's those nuances that make a big difference, because someone that's just overwhelmed with marketing is probably at the beginning stages, doesn't have there's nothing in there that says they're making any effort. So you might attract someone that is not going to be action oriented. Where if you say are you overwhelmed with all of the things you're having to do to market your business, then you're talking to someone that is doing all the things and it's crushing them. Another word that you can use is frustrated, which can be used interchangeably with overwhelmed, and again means a totally different thing. So if I say, are you frustrated with your marketing? It means they have to have been actually marketing in order to feel frustrated, and their expectations are not being met, because that's what frustration is.
They had a plan and it's not working.
Right.
Yeah.
So that means that you're going to attract someone that is taking action and isn't allowing themselves to be a victim of circumstances. So that's why the psychographics between who is that ideal client are so important, because those word choices matter and we can figure out which
Mm,
words need to be used in which situation.
mm. I love this piece so much. And as a lover of language and words, it is funny because when you think about, even just think about the people that you know in your life and how differently they all use language. And I've learned this even in the context of my marriage. I'm very literal, right? Where like I have to have clarity even to understand what somebody is saying, right? I will end up asking a lot of questions to try to get to that clarity because a word choice was wrong or a little bit off or something. And so my brain is scrambling to try to figure out, well, did they mean that word choice or did they really just mean this other word and they didn't say it, or whatever. So,
Right.
and my husband can end up feeling like he's getting deposed on the stand.
being interrogated, right? Why are you
Totally.
interrogating me with such a simple thing? Because I don't understand what you meant.
That's right.
And I
He's
want to make sure I understand, so I respond appropriately. It's totally the same.
Yes, he's very figurative. He wants me to just get the general concept and he's fine with that. And I really want to understand it with a level of clarity that's quite different. And so, even when I think about that, your examples that you just gave were excellent examples about how people can intend to say a particular thing and not end up saying it if they don't have, right, real clarity on word choice.
You also brought up a really good point that there's different personality types. So there's some people that using figurative speech will land, and then there's other people that need more literal logical speech. And I find that a lot of heart-centered entrepreneurs find marketing extremely challenging
Mm.
because they speak in feelings. So they'll say empower, they'll use the words like overwhelm, because that's an
Mhm.
emotional it's a feeling word. And so they'll say these things that they'll describe these results or the feelings that someone's going to have when they get those results. And they expect them to speak to themselves because it means so much to them. But the problem is that they're words and not everyone can feel the words as you're saying them. So we need to mix it. We need to keep the emotional words because that's who they are. And honestly, the people they're going to do their best work with will speak like match that energy. And we match that with more clear explanations and tangible examples and uh, just things that trigger for people being able to see themselves in that situation and recognizing themselves being in that
Mhm.
situation, those having those symptoms. Um, so that's kind of one of the things my clients say is that I translate for them into like
Right.
human speak. So so I have clients that literally all they do is, we get on the phone and this is what I'm trying to say. And then I'll say it back to them, be like, yes, that is human. Thank you.
Well, it's so true. We laugh about it, but you raise this topic of translation and like I really see that in people that are good at messaging and helping others do that the right way. It is a form of translation. And especially when I mean, we've talked about nuance and the importance of using clarity in our language. And then there's this whole other overlay you just mentioned of personality types. Like, who are you talking about? And I'm a little curious whether you have, because I know there's lots of approaches out there to understanding or communicating with people better based on categorizing them as a certain type of personality. So like, I don't know if Jane Powers, she was on this podcast really early on after I launched it, but I had been to several of her events as a speaker, and she's got a system. I think hers is called Code to Close, but she categorizes people as catalysts, optimizers, experts, and relators, right? So it's 4 simple labels. And I know there's a gazillion other systems out there, but I think because I was at the event and I sat through like hours of her training on this, like it stuck and I remember that. And I always think about that, especially when you come across copy where you're like, oh my gosh, this is totally 100% talking to catalysts. Or like you just mentioned, this is totally 100% talking to the relators of the world. And I think it's really interesting when you look at copy to wonder, is it intentional? Like, for example, do you work with clients that really only need to be working with catalysts? You know what I mean? And if they're
Yeah.
clear on that, helping them design their language in that way.
So I don't teach anything about that,
Yeah.
but I do use, it's called PCM, and it's actually the profiling system that they've used in NASA and
Oh,
in the
wow.
government. And so I'm not the person certified in it, but I have
Yeah.
my business partner is she's a human behavior expert. And she's certified and licensed in the US to use that. And so I'll kind of run sales pages through her, and she also co-leads my long-term implementation mastermind. And so we do use those things, and within the categories that they have, like the thinkers versus the harmonizers, and the way, not just the way you speak and communicate, but for instance, there's a certain personality type that you have to challenge them
Mm,
in order to like keep them engaged.
yeah.
And so there's like certain points in the copy where you'll put just this like kind of pattern interrupt, this all sounds really complicated, but it's very natural when you've been doing it for a really long time. And
Right.
it's like I do teach my clients how to kind of just create natural patterns and communicate in a natural way. So a pattern interrupt is actually just something you do naturally
Right.
eventually.
Right.
But yeah, that's what you're talking about is spot on. Is when you, and that's why the first step is understanding those target profiles.
Mhm.
Like we're literally profiling them, like you see on those like serial killer shows. A lot less morbid.
Right. Right. Well, it's
But we're
like that.
creating these like psychographic profiles so
Mhm.
that we understand how to communicate with them. And where it's
Yes.
not like, I want to be careful because I know a lot of people teach like the psychology behind selling, and it's kind of like in a manipulative way. This
Mm,
is not at all that. It's really,
no.
okay, how do we communicate with people? How do we translate between these different types of minds and personalities? Because until I did this work, I had no idea how different everyone is. Like
Yeah.
the way we're wired is just, I could say something to one person and it lands completely different than if I were to say it to
Yes.
someone else.
It's so true. And the thing that I think is really beneficial about understanding this particular point is, and for anybody who's ever even gone through one of those online programs, like, have you ever checked out Crystal Knows? There's an online,
No, I haven't.
yeah. So it's like that, but you use it for social networking, right? So you could like run somebody's public profile, I think, through it, and it would tell you based on the language that they've used to populate their profile or their website or whatever, what, it would tell you some really interesting things about their personality and how to relate to them in a meaningful way. And again, I hear your point around, not wanting to use any of these things in a manipulative way. I think just the more that we can do to understand our clients and potential clients, like across the board, it improves our ability to communicate with them, right? And
Right.
decrease friction and decrease stress. So, like a couple of examples in my business is I started a program that is called my Catalyst Club. And I didn't do any big launch. I just started talking about it. And I would talk about it with new clients that came my way. And it's kind of a higher level small business legal program. And the first enrollee, I just knew like 10 minutes into our conversation, he's a catalyst. I could just tell like he
Yep.
moves at a very fast pace. He makes decisions and kind of figures things out later. Right. And so on the call, we had like a 1 hour call. On the call, he's like, okay, I know I need that program. Let me go figure out how to make cash flow work and I'll be back to you. Right. And I was like, okay, that's exactly what he's going to go do. And sure enough, like a week later, he was back and he was like, yes, let's do it. And it's a 25K program. Right. So it takes a little bit of an investment. People get a ton out of it. But my next conversation was with somebody who, in the first few minutes, I was like, this is an expert. This is somebody who's very, step by step, also going to take some time to make this decision because he's got to go look at options in the marketplace.
Mhm.
But I knew not to stress out. Like he was going to go away for a time and then he was going to come back. And that's what he did.
Right.
Yeah. Like, yeah, a week or 2 weeks later, he came back and he said, well, I went and I met with 5 other law firms and I, talked with them about their options and who they serve. And anyways, he came back and it was just interesting to watch that knowledge in play, right? Because it was so clear in both of those
And
examples.
isn't it cool how it takes so much pressure off of you?
Yes. I realized like I didn't need to do any chasing with either of them. I just knew what their personality was going to require that they go do before they made that decision. And and in that way, I think it can really serve people to have that understanding so that they can have conversations that are easeful because they just know what's going to make a client comfortable and what kind of time they need to make a decision or what the pattern is going to look like. And it doesn't have to be shoving everybody through this same system designed a certain way.
Right. It's really cool how understanding your audience it doesn't just affect your marketing, it also affects you and knowing if someone's a good fit or not. And I run into that too, where it's like you lose the sale and you're like, but I could have helped that person. But then you think about it and it's like, did they fit that part of the profile? Would they have gotten the most out of this program?
Right.
Or would it have been a lot of work of you having to bridge the gaps and translate for them when it's not your natural communication style?
Right. And it is a question that I feel like people should be asking themselves because I think there are a lot of folks, and I'm sure you've crossed paths with them, that could help catalysts, optimizers, experts, relators, like whatever the labels are, right? They can help a wide variety of people. And the question is, do you feel great in your business if each of those types of client requires a slightly different approach? Like the way that I would work with a relator, it's a lot more hand holding, a lot more like relationship building and helping them feel really supported. The expert, he doesn't need any of the rah, 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 you can do it. He's going to do it, right? He just needs really clear guidelines and step by step of like, here's how it's going to happen.
Right. And here's what's interesting about that is, so I don't use the kind of profiles that
Those
you're
terms,
talking
right?
about. But we'll just say like expert, like so every thing has a light and a dark side. So any type has a light and a dark side. And so what you'll find is people present differently if they're in distress or not. So if you are attracting experts in distress, they might show up completely differently, and they might be really difficult to work with. I don't know about experts, so I don't know if that'd be true. But like understanding those things is so important because it affects how you work together and understanding if they're just in distress and it has nothing to do with you.
Yeah, that's really
And
interesting.
how to get them out of distress. You really should have a conversation with my partner, Michelle, because I think you guys would have a really interesting conversation because this is her area of nerdiness. And it's, you guys it's a very deep conversation.
It is, right. I know we're just scratching the surface, but I think when it comes to messaging, it's so relevant, right? Thinking through this of who am I really speaking to? What type of personality types do I want to work with most? And that's not to say that you have to exclude any particular types, but you could tailor your language towards it's the exercise you run people through at really attracting who their very ideal client is, right? But I think sometimes you're right that even the ideal client exercise stays really surface level for a lot of people and they don't do it the right way. Yeah. What do you find? Because I imagine that people come to you, especially if they're getting a new website or needing to revamp their messaging, and they show up one way. And then by the time the project is done, like I'm curious what shifts you see in the person, whether it's through their online work, even from a personality perspective.
What shifts do I see in the person?
What shifts do you see? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because when people come to me, they typically have their offer. They've been doing it for a while. They're experts. And when we dig into these nuances, brings a different light to their work, and they understand it much more deeply, which means they can usually take it much further and they have more confidence. So it's really fun to watch the transformation of getting someone into their element and then like nerding out with them
Yeah.
and exploring these different angles and asking these
Mhm.
questions that people haven't asked them before, and then bringing that to the forefront of their marketing. It gets really exciting because they realize there's these pieces that are just so natural to them that when they get to talk about them, it's actually
Mhm.
bringing a part of their inner workings out, and they get to show up in a different way. And it's exciting to see that other side, and it makes them more effective, because sometimes when you're doing things unconsciously and it's so natural, you can't put your finger on what it is you're doing. But when you see like the pattern and the process that you're using every single time and you don't even notice it, then you can start refining it, and
Mhm.
you can start describing it, and you can start taking this step a little bit further, because you realize, oh, like I could go a little bit further in there. I could go a little bit deeper on that in that area. And what would that do for my client? So it's really cool, watching someone go through that transformation. They usually, when we're done, it's not just, the messaging that they have, but it's actually like a whole new appreciation for their own work and a
Yeah.
whole new level of confidence in themselves as an expert.
Well, yes, and that's what I anticipated. Like in my mind, the work that you do kind of feels like a makeover, right? Like somebody has a whole new level of confidence coming out the other side because of the process that you walk them through. And the difference between somebody, and I'm curious where most people intersect with you. Are they like in the middle of a website redesign? Are they just updating their web pages? Because do you any longer do the website design portion, or is it just the
I
messaging?
don't do website design. I do
Yeah.
partner with a designer for some of my clients if they're like if they're doing a
Mhm.
full rebrand, then
Yeah.
that makes sense. Most of the time, I'm working with people that we're working within the confines of their current website so that they
Yeah.
don't have to do a whole overhaul, but we work with the layout they have and just kind of fill in the blanks with different copy.
Yeah.
But usually they're coming to me when they've reached a plateau in their business, or they've reached a point in their business where something needs to change in order for them to take things further.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's a new revenue milestone that they want to reach, and other times it's, I'm feeling burned out. I can't take on any more one-to-one clients. I need to be spending less time in my business because it's starting to consume me. And you wouldn't think that messaging would have anything to do with that, but it absolutely does.
Mm.
Because if you're able to shift your offers into something more leveraged, if you're able to have a website that is actually converting for you, you can build much simpler marketing systems and be spending a lot less time and effort marketing your business and getting the same number of clients. So there's just a lot of creativity there in how we solve the problem, but the method is primarily messaging and systems. So you kind of mentioned in my intro, like the infrastructure
Mhm.
underpinning your business. Those are the things that we're focusing on.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine it's the difference. Like I was having a conversation with another gentleman who works specifically on website design. Like the difference between having somebody be a little bit like apologetic about their current website, like when it's not a fit, right? Going, it's not really current or updated, versus really helping their message shine and be updated and have the clarity that they need. I could see a direct impact on somebody's level of confidence in actually driving traffic to the website, using it, referring people to it for resources or whatever else is there.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Um, Now, you mentioned something really interesting about the relationship between messaging and even like your time spent in your business, right? And I know before going live, we had talked a little bit about your personal experience as a mom overlaid with the pandemic and, being a business owner yourself. Do you want to share a little bit about how because it sounds like you cut down your work substantially during the pandemic and you were able to squeeze it down into a few hours a day. I'm sure that there are many people listening who, if you're like me and have not been able to do that so successfully, I'd love to hear, more about your process and what worked for you.
Yeah. So I have 3 kids. I have an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 2-year-old. So back, 7, 8 years ago, I made a big shift in my business to working only 20 hours a week. That was a huge, like, I won't even talk about that because it was not pretty.
Not pretty, like
It was
meaning that
it was a whole hot mess for a couple of years there. More recently, though, we'll talk about the different, the more sophisticated version, which is when everything shut down in March 2020. I had the kids come home from school, like they were home with me, and had to homeschool, had my husband home, everything, and I only had 2 hours a day to serve my clients because that was my husband, who has a traditional job. He could only give me 2 hours, like he blocked off 2 hours a day in his meetings so that he could watch the kids while I did whatever I could in those 2 hours. So what I did was I took the same programs that I had and then restructured them into evergreen group programs. So all I had to do was minimal marketing, and any clients that came to me, I wasn't signing up any new one-on-one clients. They were going into one of these groups. So I had established Wednesdays at these times are when I have meetings, and during this time of day. That's all I had to do to serve. And I think I had like 20 clients at the time. So I was serving 20 clients in about 2 hours a week.
And was that through like an office hours type of format, or was it individual? Like when you say serving 20 clients, they were already in this
So
group structure?
there's 2 different programs. There's the group that was for those that are starting out. And then there was the group for those that were further along in their business and making like a big transition to like that next evolution. So the difference between the folks that were starting out, they were going through a program. So the branding game that we talked about earlier, they were going through the modules in the branding game. And the way I have it set up is, this has changed since then, so it's not how it is right now. But at that time, they would do their assignment and then they would submit an RSVP form with their questions ahead of time so that I could prepare offline.
Yep.
And then when I got on the phone, I was able to, what I would do is kind of find the common threads between what they were dealing with at that time and the questions people had. And I would do like a quick 10-minute reset and reframe about what was going on and give them the piece they needed. And then I would go through answering individual questions. And then with the folks that are further along in my Trailblazers program, they, that program's always been, so they show up and it's just a group coaching call with kind of what they're working on. And again, I'm monitoring them on an individual basis as far as where they are in their projects. But the point was that I was able to get the client work into about 2 hours a week. So then the other days were spent with the marketing. So I might schedule a podcast interview like during that time, or a webinar during that time. Or that's when I wrote my emails. So I streamlined everything down to like one marketing funnel into these 2 programs. And that's all I did for 2020. And then in 2021, I stepped it up and started getting JV partners. So I'm actually still doing the same strategy, though I do work one-on-one now with people because the kids are back in school. Yay.
Moms everywhere are celebrating.
So I do work with one-on-one clients now, but I still have the 2 groups, then they're still running. And so my strategy now is I do a webinar once a month and I have 3 to 4 partners promote it. And I also have my own email list, but it's very minimal. It's minimal work. I still only work 4 hours a day. And I'm able to get it all done with time to spare often because my systems are so simple. And part of it is just you have to have a system that works. And once you have it working, it's just a matter of bringing in lead sources and driving traffic through it. And there's so many different ways you can do that. And so now I get to focus more on being able to serve my clients in ways that I prefer to serve them.
Right.
Because we go really deep.
And how nice to be in a position where you can create that flexibility for yourself, right? Like you've created these phenomenal resources that live inside of a course that you could, restructure and reuse. And, I think the goal for so many experts is to to create their version of that, right? Resources that help them deliver their work more efficiently, help them limit their time, and then give them flexibility to take on one-on-one clients as they want to, not as they need to, right?
Right. Yeah. And the part that was game changing is making the programs evergreen. So I think a lot of times when people are doing group programs, they feel like they need to start everyone at the same time. But I set it up so that there's an onboarding process before they join the group, where that gets them up to speed and meets them where they're at, and then they can join the group. So you can really be enrolling people all the time, because obviously, like, I did not have time to do a launch.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So, like I said, everything started in March. I had my baby in May.
Right. I was
I
going to
had a
say
high
your
risk
baby
pregnancy.
was like right at the start
Yeah.
of the pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I got a week off.
Oh my gosh.
But for those first 3 months, all I was doing was running those calls. I wasn't doing any marketing. So it was really
Yeah.
just that 2 hours a week that I was just making sure I was serving my current clients. But yeah, so I mean, I feel like if that can be done under duress, there's so many options available to people that they don't even realize as alternatives to the way they're running their business, how they're delivering their programs. And we can get really we're really creative in how to structure, how to deliver, how to position them so that you can really have any kind of business model that fits your lifestyle.
Well, and as I hear you talking, it just occurs to me that it sounds like the work that you're doing with your clients is actually so much more than messaging. It's
The messaging is the first part, like that's
right.
where we start. But I have clients that I've been working with for years, and those clients, it's, messaging is a piece of it. So I'm helping them on a week-to-week basis. This is what you need to be saying in your marketing. But there's also the that business model and that infrastructure and the systems piece that we're really working on behind the scenes. And then I have Michelle leading with me, which she's managing like the mindset and the human communication and the behavior pieces. So it's really like a full circle support system.
Right. Well, I mean, all these tentacles wrap around each other and they're all intertwined, right? It's really,
Right.
it is like a puzzle. Oh my gosh, so fun. And I feel like we could just keep talking and talking about this. For folks that are listening, where do you like to show up online, Holly?
So my website is hollychantal.com. Chantal is Chantal. And that's really the best place to find me.
Okay.
And there's a contact form on there if you want to reach out with any questions. And I also have on the homepage, there's a PDF you can download that kind of talks about some of these messaging underpinnings we're talking about. It's called the buyer's arc, and it talks about the decision-making process that your prospects are going through when they're deciding to hire you, and then how to align your marketing with each of those decision points. So like kind of what to say at each point to kind of guide them through that decision-making process really easily.
I love that. If you're listening, hop over and we'll share all of these links, including any links you want us to share to your social media pages.
Yeah, I'll send you a link that goes directly to the buyer's arc too, in case people want to read a little bit more about it.
Perfect. So we'll share those at the show notes page. Pop over to legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast and find Holly's episode. Holly, I know there's so much that we've talked about and that people will have a chance to dig into, including with the help of your resource. What final either takeaway or action step would you like to leave people with today?
It's a really good question because we talked about a lot of different things. Usually when someone asks me that question, like something immediately pops up. We talked about a lot of things today. So first step, let's say, think about what I really, go eat some ice cream. That's the next step.
Right. If you haven't had enough coffee, get caffeinated, have a little dose of sugar. That always gets my brain going. Exactly. Oh my gosh. I will just admit to having the tiredest week. Like all of this last week, every fall, there's a week where I feel like all I could do is sleep. And I've been having that. And I'm like, what is it? Is it fall? What's going on? Like, did I get COVID? And this is my version of COVID, is just being so tired. So I'm with you. I don't know if it's mom brain or what it is, but yeah, I guess if you were to be working with a client, right, and having them go evaluate something about their current message, is there something that you'd want them to go look at as a starting point?
Yeah, so I would look at uh, what do you feel is working really well in your
Mm,
business? And then what do you feel it like intuitively, like what does your intuition say is missing
mm,
from your business? So if you keep setting the same goals, if you are finding that you're at the same revenue levels, or worse, like your revenue is going up and down and it feels really unpredictable, like ask yourself, tune in and ask yourself, what do you feel is missing that would change the situation? Because oftentimes we're kind of just chasing what's next. And again, going through the motions and doing those next steps over and over again, but we're not taking a step back and looking at, okay,
mm,
what's actually working, what's not working, what can be eliminated, and what is really missing here. Actually, little personal vulnerability note here. I went into a tailspin a couple weeks ago because something wasn't working, and I almost just trashed everything and started over, like started my offer over. I was like, all right, I'm going to survey my audience. I'm going to just restructure the offer. It's like, it turns out we were talking about personality types. When I went back through all the people I had talked to, none of them were a personality fit.
mm,
So it wasn't actually the offer that was the problem. Because when I went back to all the surveys that I've done before, and even the recent answers to, 'cause whenever someone registers for a webinar, they get a survey. It all was in alignment with what I was already doing.
mm.
So I almost like went down this huge rabbit hole because I had like a 2-week panic.
Well, it happens.
And then when I took a step back and actually looked at the facts, I realized, oh, this is working. It's just the wrong audience, the wrong audience on this particular webinar. Totally
Mm,
fine. In
yes.
the next webinar I did, it was fine, like perfectly normal, had people signing up. There was nothing broken. It was
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So sometimes just taking that step back can be really tremendously helpful.
That's such a great example. It's proof that reevaluating the plan is often harder than just executing the original plan, right? Which is why a lot of people don't do that often enough. Reevaluate, like, is the plan working? And like you just mentioned, is it something else unrelated to the messaging or that particular thing? Because if it's a disconnect and you've just got a group of the wrong people in there, maybe it's just about shifting audiences, and that,
Yeah.
you know, keeps you out of that churn that we talked about at the start, right? Of changing everything because you get some feedback that you think should, make you question what it is that you're doing. Well, Holly, I'm so glad to be able to connect with you again. Thank you for popping on here and having a conversation about a variety of things related to messaging, websites, being a mom. It's really great to have you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.